and we're gonna get married. Karen stopped singing and leaned into the mirror, trying to decide if she needed a few drops of Visine. Today of all days, she must look her best. Her wedding day. After years of persuasion, she had finally convinced Jeff to marry her. She didn't want to give him any reason to back out at the last minute. Her long red hair was up, an elegant cascade of curls adorning the back of her head. Not a single flaw dared ruin her makeup. Her jade green eyes sparkled with excitement. The bridesmaid Jackie puttered around behind Karen, making sure everything was ready. Shoes, veil, garter, dress. A knock at the door called her away from the inventory. "I'll get it," Jackie sang and danced to the door. Karen picked up her lipstick and applied a little pink to her already perfectly sculptured lips. Her nerves were beginning to jangle. This was the most important day of her life. Imagine, 30 and not yet married. Certainly the town lowlife, which consisted of everyone Karen didn't approve had begun to talk. She should have had men beating down her door. But it doesn't matter, she consoled herself. The men in this town are beneath me. Anyway, Jeff was a real catch. He had come a long way and swept her off her feet. In between playing football at the local college and working part-time for her father's business. "Honey, you look just beautiful." "Well, it's my wedding day, Aunt Susan. I have to look great. I'm competing with all those college women." She dabbed her nose with powder. That dreadful shine must go. She couldn't go out there looking like a clown. "You don't have to compete with anyone, sweetheart. I'm sure that Jeff knows how lucky he is." Did Daddy remember the limo and the Dom Perignon? Well, of course he did, honey. I'll just die if he got something cheaper. Jeff's family expects the best. They're from New York, you know. Karen looked at her aunt, her lower lip trembling. "Can you please go check just to make sure?" "I'll do it right now. Don't you worry a bit. This is your day." Susan leaned down to kiss her. "My makeup!" Karen pulled back sharply. "Sorry, dear. How silly of me." Karen busied herself with making faces in the mirror. She alternately looked joyful and seductive, angry and coy. Billy Ray sat in the funeral parlor, leafing through the latest issue of Penthouse. He made it a point not to read anything, despising those who claimed to buy the magazine for the articles. He bought it strictly for the babes. The centerfold was a green-eyed redhead. She looked nothing like Karen, but Billy Ray had an active imagination. Of course, any chance he had of seeing Karen naked was going down the drain. She was getting married to some rich jock. He supposed that a man who worked for a living wasn't good enough for her. She had always treated him like he was an undesirable, as one of the stiffs that he worked with. He knew that Karen laughed at him whenever he so much as looked at her. Hell, she even laughed right in his face when he'd finally got up the guts to ask her out. They may have been back in high school, but it stung. If nothing else, Billy Ray would have liked to embarrass her the way she had embarrassed him. The phone rang and Billy Ray waited to answer it until the 6th ring. People thought it was strange if he acted too eager to pick up bodies or arrange funerals. "What?" His hand turned white from holding the phone so tightly. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Are you sure?" Yeah, okay. I'll be right there. Yes, I'll go to the chapel and break the news." Terrible tragedy, yeah, I agree. He dropped the phone back into its cradle. Today was his lucky day. Only a little over an hour to go. Jackie held up the old-fashioned white gown for Karen to inspect. Someone began urgently knocking on the door. "I'll get it," Jackie said. "Karen, I have to talk to you." Susan rushed in, her face white. She had just spoken to Billy Ray, who had come from the mortuary. "What is it?" She smiled sweetly, but prepared herself for anger. Her father had been able to get the car. There were no limos in this pissant town. Sweetheart, I don't know how to tell you this. It's just awful. She glanced at Karen's bridesmaid. Jackie, could you leave us alone? Of course. What is it? The limo? I can't believe this. My wedding day and he couldn't get the car? Am I supposed to drive away in the Cadillac? Karen looked back into the mirror quickly to check her pout. Susan stared at her blankly for a moment. Honey, Jeff was in an accident last night. They tried everything, but it was just too late. Karen turned away from the mirror with obvious relief. So the limo's still on its way. Yes, I mean, Karen, listen to me. Jeff is dead. Well, what do you mean he's dead? We're getting married today. We're getting married and he's not backing out of it. I may not be a sophisticated New York woman, but I won't take no for an answer. Karen, he's gone. Listen to what I'm saying. He died at the scene before they even reached the hospital. I'm so sorry, honey. I know how you must feel, but try to be strong. You don't think that this is going to stop us, do you? We're getting married today. She quickly made herself relax, not wanting to mess her hair. She had to look good at her wedding. The wedding starts in an hour. I'll be dressed and ready, she smiled sweetly and turned away, dismissing Susan. Susan looked at her carefully. Karen's eyes were glazed over. Perhaps her father could make her realize what this all meant. If he were only here. He had promised to be here for the wedding, and Susan knew that he had planned to, most likely right at the moment Karen was walking down the aisle. Susan made up her mind to call him and explain the situation, but before she made it to the phone, Billy Ray stopped her. You should really let me call Mr. Marcietti. He would never forgive me if he knew I'd gotten you all upset like this. You just go take care of Karen. She probably shouldn't be alone right now. He took Susan's arm and led her halfway back to the dressing room. You go now and I'll call him right away. She refuses to believe it's true, Billy Ray. She insists that there still be a wedding. She's just in shock. I'm sure her father will be able to make her understand the situation. Meanwhile, you go humor her. Let her have her little fantasy for now. We'll clear this up as soon as I get a hold of Mr. Marcietti. Everything is going to be all right, I promise. Billy Ray smiled as he watched her walk away. A plan was beginning to take shape. The wedding began promptly at 2 in the afternoon. The church filled quickly with town people. They moved quietly without the happy chatter that accompanied most weddings. They felt the tension in the air and didn't want to draw attention to themselves. Finally, with everyone settled down, they began to talk in hushed tones. Where was the father of the bride? Why was the aunt crying uncontrollably? The doctor had come in and given her an injection, but she still sobbed. And where was the groom? Their wait was not long. The groom arrived 5 minutes after. Instead of a limo, he arrived in the hearse. Luckily, no one was outside to see the mortician removing the body from the car, mumbling loudly to himself. His apprentice helped him lift the body out and prop it up on a dolly. They'd picked up the newest dolly they had, a bright red one with fat black wheels and hardly any scrapes. Do I have to? The apprentice asked quietly, looking over Billy Ray and the gun that he held. He had known Billy Ray since grade school and had no doubt that he would pull the trigger. Anyone sick enough to do a thing like this would think nothing of adding a body to the pile. I don't know if my heart can take this. This is going too far. The mortician wiped his forehead with his handkerchief. The apprentice pressed his lips together tightly and began tying the body to the dolly. A rope around the chest, waist, and each leg held up the body, but the head flopped. After staring at his feet for a few moments, he sighed in resignation and tied a strap of rope around the forehead to hold the head up. Disgusting, he muttered under his breath. They wheeled the groom right up to the altar. Billy Ray followed close behind, the gun hidden. For a dead man, the groom didn't look too bad, considering the severity of the accident. The makeup artist had done a creative job. Cuts and bruises had been covered skillfully, while his eyes and mouth had been sewn carefully shut. The priest let out a squeak of surprise and began to retreat. Billy Ray caught him. "You go ahead and do your job, Father." He looked at the corpse a moment, smiling. "The poor boy merely had an accident and needs some help standing up. It was the best we can do on short notice. You wouldn't want to let Karen down now, would you?" He pushed the gun into the priest's ribs. The guests watched, stupefied, as the two conversed. Their eyes traveled back and forth between the priest, who was turning a very pale shade of white, and Billy Ray. Calming words from Billy Ray, angry words from the priest. Soon Billy Ray was threatening and the priest was apologetic. Through this exchange, the groom appeared to be sleeping. Karen's father failed to show up, having received a call saying that the wedding would be held in a nearby town, seeing how the church had been flooded due to a broken pipe. It would be a good hour before he realized that the call had been a hoax. Karen, having no patience whatsoever and being fearful that any sort of wait at all would just give Jeff another chance to back out, started down the aisle by herself. The guests in the back pews had not yet caught on, wondering why the groom could not stand by himself. The guests in the front pews noticed that the groom's aftershave was exceptionally pungent and rank. All the guests were silent, amazed. No one dared to leave. The father owned all their homes and businesses, might arrive at any minute. Bride and groom stood, bride stood, groom leaned, before the priest. The ceremony was quick, for the priest feared for his immortal soul. Finally he came to the end. "Do you, Karen, take Jeff to be your lawfully wedded husband till..." He cleared his throat. "Death do you part?" "I do." "And do you, Jeff, take Karen to be your lawfully wedded wife till death do you part?" Then there was silence. The priest cleared his throat, intending to go on. Karen cut him off. "Oh, someone has sewn his lips shut. How can he talk when he can't even open his mouth?" She whirled to face the guest. "Who has some scissors or a pocket knife?" she demanded. An older woman through the third pew dug some manicure scissors from her purse. "Well, here you go, dear." Karen ran down to her wedding gown trailing behind her. She plucked them from the woman's hand and ran back to the husband-to-be. She snipped the sutures away carefully, mumbling to herself about the incompetency of this town. Satan, who usually had better things to do, but happened to be free today, was watching this with some interest. Lately he had tired to become more involved in personal lives instead of just causing plagues and wars. And this was indeed a very interesting case. Perhaps he could get something out of this. He giggled. To be married in the house of God, that would get the old goat. Even more important, he was looking for a wife. It was his turn to have a son. Karen finished her alterations and turned back to the horrified priest. "You can go ahead now." "Thank you," the priest whispered and uttered a short prayer for forgiveness. "Do you, Jeff, take Karen to be your lawfully wedded wife until death do you part?" Karen turned toward her love, Jeff. He looked so pale and stiff, she was worried that he was coming down with a cold. Jeff's mouth popped open, a belch of brimstone and hellfire pouring out. "I do," he croaked and stepped away from the dolly. The ropes falling burnt to his feet. His eyes popped open and the sutures burned away. The priest fainted. Karen looked down at the fallen priest in horror. He had forgotten the last line. She quickly looked around, her eyes begging for anyone to fix this last one setback. Billy Ray stepped into the priest's place. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." The guests applauded, their hands containing a den of life of their own. Satan called his office and instructed them to keep an eye on Billy Ray. The boy had potential. Then he told them to hold all calls for the following month. He would be on his honeymoon.